Welcome back to Question Pro Fireside Chats. Happy Friday. We are officially in December. It's the holiday season. We're getting there to the end of the year. I was at dinner last night. I was like, oh my God, it's almost 2024. We're getting there. Today, we've got a super special guest. We've got Charlotte Kiddle here, who is the Chief Research and Partnership Officer at Virtual Store Trials, also known as VST. And this is going to be an exciting session. We're really going to be talking all about packaging design, looking at how things are placed in stores. How do we do the right research to make sure that we're in the right place on the store shelves? And we've got an amazing guest with Charlotte, who, fun fact about Charlotte, also a very keen and avid lacrosse player. As I think you've been playing lacrosse for 20 years on some national teams and now in the coaching business as well.
Yep.
That's amazing. So for any of our live viewers today, we're going to be taking questions on packaging design, retail store design, but we will also be taking questions about lacrosse. So if there are any, I think we've got an expert in the room here for you today. Charlotte, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be super exciting, learning all about what you guys do and kind of, testing store shelves and packaging design. But why don't we start a little bit with your career and your background? Tell us a little bit about how you kind of got here to your role at VST.
So my route to VST is probably quite a typical market research route, but I have ended up in a tech company, which I suppose is slightly less usual. But to me was a very obvious next step given sort of the route I came through. I started in Kantar, like I think everybody does at some point in their career. And then I realized that big companies weren't really my gig. So I moved to what was called Brain Juicer, now System 1, which I was there for almost 12 years. And that was a great place to work as an early stage researcher. Loads of innovative ways of thinking, ways of doing research, and a really disruptive company to work for. And then I moved into The Source, which was more of a retail strategy company. Again, a really small company answering lots of big questions for retailers and brands who wanted to be, doing their category best. So I guess I went from comms and ads and innovation into retail and big questions. And then I was like, what's next? What is next? And it felt like going to a tech company made absolute sense, and one that was both innovative and retail focused with some of the same end clients. I think people think that tech is really different, but I would argue it's not at all. It's just about what you center your business on. So where at Brain Juicer, we centered it on philosophy and this System 1 thinking. And at The Source, we centered it on customer voice. We just center our business on the technology and how the technology can do the best for our clients and answer our clients' questions the best. And I think that's all it is that you change your mindset to what's your touchstone. And that's what we have at VST, is that the technology that underpins all of our shelf testing and all of our kind of understanding of planograms, because planograms are what we love and what we work with a lot, so niche. But yeah, so in that sense, my career has always been about small companies making changes, creating new ways of thinking, and doing the best that we can for our clients.
I love it. I mean, I think probably half the guests that we've had on this show have started their career at Kantar. So it's like everybody starts there. And you're right. I mean, in some ways, like all of these companies have tech somewhere in the business model, right? And now it's just that you're kind of, flip the equation. Now you're kind of tech first, right? And that really ends up being the model. But for those of us that don't know about Virtual Store Trials, just tell us a little bit about the company, what you guys kind of do, and then we can kind of jump into some of the methodologies.
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit, the name is a little bit Ron Seal, Virtual Store Trials. We work virtually with store trials. So, and that's how we kind of set out at the start, was to help retailers and brands make better decisions about what should sit on shelf. So that historically has been quite a long process, because you'd have to do in-store testing or in-person testing. And we wanted to make it a much more flexible, much sort of quicker and agile approach. And so we started out in shelf testing. And what that means is like we can answer any questions about changes at shelf. So be that a pack change or a merchandising change, a price, promotions, anything that's non-tactile, you can test virtually. And I think then as that progressed, where we've kind of started to focus more is not just on testing those changes, but also being able to represent and help brands know what's on shelf. So whilst I look after all of the research and insight part of it, which is all of that great shelf testing, we also work with retailers to take all of their planogram data and put that into easily kind of digestible bits of information that brands can buy, so they can see, for example, what any shelf in any Tesco in the UK looks like right now and for the past 3 years. And that's a massive bit of software and technology that we've developed alongside retailers.
Wow. So this is like way more than just your kind of traditional image of a shelf and like what draws your attention, right? I mean, you're going all the way into pricing, full planograms, how you sit next to the products that are next to your product, what's the merchandising that's happening, what's the signage that's around it. It's almost like a full retail strategy that you're helping these brands and companies with. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we very much feed into retail strategy and into kind of category plans a lot. We sort of want, so we've got this a phrase of like every store, every change, and that's our aspiration. Is at the moment we are able to do that in the UK really effectively, but globally we want to be able to get to a point, this is such a moonshot, of being able to see into any store globally and be able to say, what does it look like right now? And then help brands say, what should it look like? You can test that, see what happens, like decide if it's a good idea to go ahead with a change that you think is the right thing, and then help brands make a story to the retailers. And I think that's where we are different. Where we want to be different is in who we work with, I guess. So we work with research and insight professionals, but we also work a lot with category, and we work a lot with trade marketing, RGM, those different groups of people within brands. And actually they're all asking very similar questions, but so often that we don't always talk to each other. So we see our role as kind of being able to bridge that, being able to have a multi-team retail strategy.
Wow, I love that moonshot vision, right? To say, hey, we want to be able to show you a peek at every single retail store in the world. It almost reminds me of like the Google Maps Street View, but for stores, right? For
Yeah, that's
retail
exactly
stores.
it.
Like you literally get somebody in there and take pictures of the entire shelves, and then really give that as the ability for people to kind of set that retail strategy, give them a roadmap for how they get into these stores. So walk us through that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your approach to building a retail strategy. If you're a new FMCG brand or food and beverage brand, how should we be thinking about developing and building out a retail strategy?
I guess from our point of view, we are pretty focused on the fixture itself and how you stand out on that fixture. So we helped a coffee brand, which doesn't exist here, exists globally, try to get space in a major retailer. And the way that we supported them with that problem was that we sort of looked at how their coffee, where it should sit on shelf. So we knew what the shelves look like right now because we have all of that data. We can help them with that. We can look at the adjacencies where it should best fit. And then we looked at how that then worked with signage and without signage, and what did that signage help with, help in terms of consumer understanding. So that was a typical shelf test where we put that in front of shoppers, asked them to shop a shelf, and we could then help build that retail strategy, not just for the brand, but for the category. So we could say, by putting this new brand on shelf, it will grow the category X%. It will grow the premium part of the category specifically. So we can talk in real like volume and spend. It's not just a sort of I don't know, 10 people picked this up and they thought this. We actually talking like this will deliver X% of growth to your category. And then we talk very much then to the brand. So the brand is playing this type of role as well. So we're sort of covering both those really important, the vocabulary, I guess, of retail when it comes to spend. And then we're also talking to the brand part of things. So the softer measures of, by putting this on shelf, you are talking much more to Italy, and you're talking much more to the benefits of an Italian coffee, for example. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, so when I think about kind of a brand coming into a store, into a retail store, right? I mean, I'll put myself into the shoes of somebody who wants to sell a new beer product at a grocery store, right? And I'm trying to pitch this grocery store, retailer, big chain. I'm trying to get on the shelves. I'm thinking about my product, right? I'm thinking about, okay, how do I sell through more of my product? Do I have the right packaging, design? Do I have something that's differentiated from the other ones but you're actually thinking much more broadly. How is your product actually helping the retailer to solidify a category and actually generate more revenue across all the products, which almost seems like this perfect pitch, right? If you're the brand trying to get on the shelves, I actually don't think a lot of brands necessarily think that way, right? That, hey, actually, let's bring in the data that shows you how not only are you going to sell more of my product, you're going to sell more of everybody else in this category. And I've got the data to kind of show that. So you're actually helping these brands get into the store and make a case to get in. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, exactly that. It's so important to be category first when you're coming in, because the retailer cares less about your brand than you do. They'll care a bit about your brand, of course, but like they're thinking more macro. They're thinking about that total category and how it works. That's one use case. We worked with a leading household brand where they were looking at a trend, which was the COVID trend, and people using wipes more, and they were able, with our data, to make an argument that they should increase their share of space on shelf because their share of sales were higher than their share of space. So they looked at their sales data, they looked at our share of space data, and they actually argued for an increase in facings of 33%, which is massive to change that. Wow. And it resulted in a 5% increase in category sales. So by thinking in broad stroke terms around like big trends, like using wipes to remove germs, I know that maybe sounds small, but it's huge in household. You can argue a really big change.
It's interesting, right? Because if you think about it, like the shelves in a retail store is a fixed amount of space. And there are far more products that want to be in that fixed amount of space, right? And then everybody's got to make these micro decisions, like, do we increase the space for this category, this product line by 25%? The COVID example is great, right? Like I don't know that much shelf space was dedicated to wipes beforehand. I have to imagine that it's doubled, tripled the size on the shelf now post-COVID, right? Or during COVID and post-COVID. Tell us a little bit more about kind of where the virtual comes in, right? So, how was this kind of done before? What's the benefit to doing it virtually versus actually doing this kind of stuff in store? Walk us through kind of the virtual component of what you guys do.
Yeah. So I think, a virtual element is, we haven't reinvented the wheel here. There are other people that do virtual things, but the big change has been from brands having to do in-store testing or in-person testing. So there was probably a time where retailers would say, well, if you've got a change, then we can test it out in a store. And I guess, there's a lot of business pain. We like to talk about business pain a lot. And it's very slow. It has to be in store for, a good 12 weeks for you to test a change. It's very expensive because you've got to, buy that space. And the reality is that you can't actually make sure that nothing else is influencing it. So you don't know that it's been applied perfectly by the manager. You don't know that like some random person is having a birthday and has decided that they really love whatever you bought and they buy it all and it skews all your results, And so the virtual part of that helps to kind of talk to that pain. So instead of it being in store, it's on on a device. People shop a shelf in that way, and we can do that, instead of months, we do that in days. So you're able to answer your questions so much faster. We know it's really robust, so we always use 500 people per scenario, so per thing we're testing. So that's a minimum of 500. We try sometimes when we have really large shelves, we'll go to 1,000 or 1,500 because we want it to be robust. And we've lined that up with in-market data as well. We're really good at predicting things that will come to play. And then, of course, it's cheaper. Like, it still costs money, but it's much cheaper than popping it into the store itself. So by doing it virtually, I think it changes the behavior as well. So you're able to test way more iteratively. So you can kind of go, well, I actually have 5 ideas. I'm going to test 5 ideas and then take the best one to the retailer, so I know that's going to have a good impact. Or, all right, none of my ideas worked. How can we make them better? Let's test them again. Great, that worked. Let's take that on. So I think, doing it virtually allows for a really different way of thinking as well.
It almost is like, I'm a web guy, right, and a tech guy, and I almost kind of, think about it the way that e-commerce works, right? I mean, if you look at Amazon, I mean, they have such real-time data as to which product should go on the homepage.
Yeah.
If I've got 5 different images, we can instantly test which one is going to work best to bring people to be interested in that product, to buy that product. And that's probably been a huge advantage for e-commerce that you really couldn't do in the physical retail store, right? I mean, you're talking about 12 weeks to do a real in-person store test of a product. And it almost seems like you guys are bringing those two worlds together, where the benefits that the e-commerce folks have, you're now almost bringing that to the physical store itself, where you can kind of work at that same level of speed, iteration, optimization. And these tests don't have to be very expensive, right? They can get done quickly, relatively cheaply, and you get much, much more data coming in that you can make decisions on. So you're almost taking like a 12-week cycle and bringing it down to 1 week in the same way that all the e-commerce folks do it.
Yeah, exactly that. We're really keen that people make the right decisions and make them fast, because everything does happen quicker nowadays. Like, we can't rely on the ways that have been done in the past. Like, there will always be a place for those in-store things, when it's a big change and retailers really, really need to stress test something. There is a place for those, but I think there's a huge opportunity in virtual testing ahead of putting anything into store.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, obviously the e-commerce folks, they've got tons and tons of data, and they're using all sorts of machine learning models and AI to kind of optimize these things in real time. Tell us a little bit about your kind of innovations, the machine learning models that you're using. How do you take advantage of that data to make these cases really clear to your customers?
Yeah, it's funny because obviously there's a lot of talk about AI in the industry nowadays, and how it's sort of really come to the fore of how people are working and how we as an industry are changing. One of the things that we do, which we don't really shout about a huge amount, but we've been using AI for a while, and it goes back to that point of we want to help make this process faster. And to do that, we need to get images to go on our shelves. Now, that, having worked in other companies before working here, like, it's a massive pain point for clients and for insight agency folk, because you have to go and find these images. You don't really know where they go, all that kind of stuff. But we, the way that we have created the software actually allows us to source those images very easily. And it also allows us to make them ready on the shelf. So we have some AI which helps cut them out. It's it sounds really small, but it is so important in getting our shelves to look really good, so that we're not having to kind of do these things by hand, where we are looking to use AI to make the whole process faster. So that in itself is one example of how we use it. And then we have some, like my moonshot point earlier is that we have some really big plans around predictive planogramming as well. So at the moment we test changes on plans, but the reality is that we reckon that we can probably get to a view of predicting ideal layouts. The reason being is for Planogram Publisher, which is one of the products we have, like I said earlier, we have a lot of planogram data. We know what these shelves look like. Now that data is really complex because you know you've got over 4,000, say, Tesco stores in the UK. So knowing what is on every single shelf in each of those over 3 years, that's billions of lines of data. It's like it's a lovely data set to apply machine learning to. And then as we ingest sales data, maybe alongside those things, you can start to see what happens historically when changes are made and that impact on sales. And where we want to get to is to say, well, we know how that has happened, what's happened when we've done that in the past. So let's look at predicting what can happen with those two data sets. So that's where we sort of are hoping to sort of make some strides on that this year, or I say this year, sorry, 2024.
Well, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense, right, in terms of like where you're going and kind of the vision for this thing. I mean, both of those examples to me are really exciting, right? On the first case, you kind of are looking at this and saying, you know, to your point, it's like, oh, you're just kind of adding images and using AI to add images. But when you really think about it, I mean, a store shelf is a combination of somewhere on the order of hundreds of different products that could have thousands or hundreds of thousands of different combinations. And it goes back to what you were saying about kind of agility and why the virtual, you know, kind of store shelf is actually a better place to test, right? I mean, how many combinations of products can you really test on a store shelf in person for a 12-week period of time, right? Maximum maybe 1 or 2. But with AI, you can actually, you know, go and try out tons of different combinations. Okay, what happens if we were sitting next to a can of Coca-Cola? Or what happens if we were sitting next to a can of Fanta? What's different? Where's the right place for us? AI makes complete sense there. And then your second kind of model, I think that is really exciting because you have this high level data set across all of the retailers. Yeah. Right. And so even when we go back to like the Amazon model, it's like, yeah, but they've got their own data, right? They don't know what's going on Walmart's site or on Target's site or something like that. But you get to have this kind of high level, like you kind of get a sense for, okay, what's Tesco doing? What's M&S doing? What are these other retailers? And how can we bring all of that together? Which makes a ton of sense. As a brand, you want to be in all of those stores, right? And you want to know, okay, what's the optimal way to package, design, position this, no matter which retailer you're going to sit in. Sounds like VST is going to have that kind of one data set that's going to give you the big picture across the entire retail landscape.
Yeah. Moonshots.
Moonshots. I love it. But that's what this machine learning stuff comes down to, right? Exactly. It's like who has the biggest data set, right? That's going to be the players that win. And it sounds like you guys have the head start in all of this and the right vision to make it happen, right? To say, hey, let's just be like have the view on every single store. So it sounds like super, super exciting times lay ahead. Always fun to talk about huge data sets and machine learning and AI, but let's get into some of the practical, tangible examples. Can you walk us through some use cases, some examples of how customers are taking advantage of VST?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a really nice one which I can totally talk about because it like the client has said that we can. So we did this really interesting piece of work over in the US about whiskey and redefining whiskey in the US market. I think it was in Total Wines where we were looking. So you probably aren't aware that American single malt whiskey has had a legal change around it, which allows it to become its own sort of subcategory within whiskey. Whereas before it was sort of just intermingled in the single malts. And so all of these distilleries were like, well, we need to argue to have our own space. If we are our own defined category, we want some data which we can take to the retailers to say, well, actually create us some space and we will help premiumize your whiskey shelves. And that's what we supported them on. So we tested a base shelf where ASM, or American single malt, was just dotted around as it is.
Okay.
And then we created its own defined space on the shelf. We added in a few new brands, a few new things. And what it did was absolutely amazing. So in creating its own space, it helped it really stand out. And actually it premiumized the whole whiskey space. So
Wow.
very interesting, you know, American consumers who cared about provenance, who cared about, you know, American products, they were more interested in buying that than they were in a Scottish one or a Japanese whiskey. So it actually focused people into this product, which is at a higher price point than some of those other single malts. So they had a really strong argument to take to retailers to create this, because not only did they premiumize the whole category, they actually created this really nice halo effect of provenance.
Wow.
Which was,
Interesting.
yeah. So they've actually been able to take that out to Total Wines, who they did the work for, and that's now rolling out in the States. And now they can also take that and communicate that to other retailers. And that has been, I think, kind of pretty fundamental in their arguments to taking that to retailers. So that one's a really nice one, because it's a shelf test. It's you know, like my bread and butter work, and it's really nice when that kind of does get taken and really used to communicate to a retailer. And I guess, you know, your point about retail strategy, that's exactly what it is. They knew their retail strategy. They just needed some data to back up what they knew they needed to do. And that was also interesting, that the end client was a consortium. It was a group of American single malt whiskeys, because they weren't a subcategory. They're all quite small. So to be powerful, they had to all come together to make that decision. And that's really interesting, that they all work together to create that subcategory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating, right? Because in this space, it's a constant negotiation between the brand and the retailer, right? And one can't exist without the other. And so this notion that you're bringing data, you're actually thinking through the category from the retailer's perspective in order to win, right? You're not just some small, you know, American single malt whiskey brand, but you're actually just thinking about the entire category at different levels, right? The American single malt category, but then the entire whiskey category, all the way out to the entire liquor category, and how is it actually helping that retailer sell more? Like, what do you look for in these tests? And what are some of the metrics that are coming out? I mean, are you looking at like eye tracking and where people are looking? Is it actual virtual sell-through data? Is it like engagement data? What are kind of the metrics that you look for?
So the main metrics that we get from our platform are our sales data, essentially. So the three main things I look at are basket penetration of a brand, a product, a subcategory, how much they sell, and how many units. And the main thing is to look at that versus the base. So what currently exists, and what you're looking at is how does customer or shopper behavior change from that current situation to the new one. And where it's lovely is because we have those 500 people, we can really break that down, not just at category level, but into subcategories, into shopper segmentations, all those types of things, so that we're able to support the vocabulary of retailers. And I think that's really important, that's why we talk about spend, that's why we talk about volume, that's why we talk about penetration. We also do sort of have an understanding of attention. We work with another company to help us understand where people might look. We don't actually integrate eye tracking into our studies. We're much sort of, we have a preference for kind of AI approach to understanding heat mapping and understanding attention at that point. And that's sort of what comes out of the actual core virtual shop. But what sits around that, and I guess what we use Question Pro for as well, is the kind of evaluation questions as well. So we also ask a lot of those evaluation questions, which we link into the behavior. So the behavior is really system one. It's really like, what did people do? And then we ask why they did it. And so we get an understanding of why that is. We can look at, attitudes and what impact that has on shopper behavior. So to us, the behavior is the thing which we report on.
I love it. Yeah. No need to worry about vanity metrics when you just get right down to behavior and revenue, right? I mean, that's what people care about.
Interesting, like what that our end customer quite often is a category manager or somebody working in RGM. That's what they care about, and that's what they're talking to the retailers about. And I think that we have to walk or have a balance of how we approach these things, because pure sales works really well for one group of people, but then your brand manager's like, well, but what happened about my brand? And that's really important as well. And so
Right.
those evaluation questions around brand equity attributes or brand association, they're super important as well.
Right.
Just to allow those conversations, to allow those end groups of people to all come together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real mix of stakeholders that have
Mhm.
competing interests, right? That you're kind of navigating and helping people navigate, right? I mean, it's a good point, right? You can't always just optimize for revenue, otherwise, probably you're going to do things that negatively impact the brand and the wider perception. And obviously, there's certain ways to hack revenue in the short term that actually kind of damages revenue in the long term. So it's good to see that you're kind of building that holistic picture and really understanding the segments and the motivations. Charlotte, this is probably something that we could talk about for another 3 sessions. I just find it absolutely fascinating. But I hope for everybody out there, this was a good kind of dipping of the toe into retail strategy and testing the retail storefronts. Please do check out Virtual Store Trials, VST. Find them online if you're kind of in this space. They're really, really up to some fantastic work. And Charlotte, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. This was great.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. For everybody out there, enjoy the weekend, enjoy the holidays coming up, and we'll be back soon.